Good afternoon. Welcome to the San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting of Tuesday, September 23rd, 2014. Madam Clerk, could you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. President. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos present. Supervisor Breed.
Here.
Breed present. Supervisor Campos.
Present.
Campos present. President Chu.
Present.
Chu present. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen present. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell present. Supervisor Kim. Kim not present. Supervisor Marr.
Here.
Marr present. Supervisor Tang.
Present.
Tang present. Supervisor Wiener.
Present.
Wiener present. Supervisor Yee.
Present.
Yee present. Supervisor Kim. Kim present. Mr. President, all members are present.
Ladies and gentlemen, could you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, do we have any communications?
There are no communications today, Mr. President.
And could you read our consent agenda?
Item 1 is the consent calendar. It is considered routine. If a member objects, an item may be removed and considered separately.
Roll call vote.
On item 1, Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed.
Aye.
Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr. Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee. Yee, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The ordinance is finally passed. Item 2.
Item 2 is an ordinance to appropriate approximately $2 million from the General Fund Reserve to the Mayor's Office of Housing to be divided over 2 fiscal years, 2014-15 and 15-16, for legal services for unaccompanied children and families on the San Francisco Immigration Court's expedited removal docket.
Supervisor Campos.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to note that it seems that our actions here at the Board of Supervisors are having an impact in other parts of the country. We just hear that New York City is allocating about $2 million along the same lines that the City and County of San Francisco is doing today. So thank you to my colleagues, to the Mayor's office.
Colleagues, can we take this same house, same call? Without objection, this ordinance is finally passed. Item 3.
Item 3 is an ordinance to amend the Administrative Code Section 6.68H to authorize the Public Works Director to issue a competitive process between pre-qualified construction managers, general contractors, and to pre-qualified core trade subcontractors to design, build the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and exterior building envelope scopes of work for the Traffic Company and Forensic Services Division project.
Same house, same call. This ordinance is passed on the first reading. Item 4.
Items 4 through 6, Mr. President.
4 through 6.
These are the 3 ordinances from the Public Utilities Commission that de-appropriate the following funds from fringe benefits or salary: approximately $12,300 from the Commission's Bureau operating budget, approximately $79,000 from the Commission's Water Enterprise Department operating budget, and $194,000 from the Commission's Wastewater Enterprise Department operating budget, and reappropriating the surplus expenditure to support projected increases in overtime salaries for the PUC to be retroactive to June 30th, 2014.
Colleagues, same house, same call. These ordinances are passed on the first reading. Item 7.
Item 7 is an ordinance approving the remarketing of Finance Corporation lease revenue refunding bonds for the Moscone Center Expansion Project Series 2008 1 and 2, approving the form of a reimbursement, custodian, and fee agreements, including the amended and restated agreements, approving the remarketing supplement, and granting general authority to city officials to take the necessary actions in connection with the remarketing of the bonds and ratifying previous actions taken in connection therewith.
Colleagues, same house, same call. This ordinance is passed in the first reading. Item 8.
Item 8, resolution to retroactively approve Amendment Number 1 to the cellular service equipment sites lease between T-Mobile West and the city, extending the term for 5 years from July 1st, 2014 through June 30th, 2019.
Same house, same call. This resolution is adopted. Next item.
Item 9, resolution approving modification number 1 to 2001 lease and the use agreement between Hawaiian Airlines and the city to add the administrative office to the lease for an approximate minimum guarantee of $870,000 over the remainder of the lease expiring on June 30th, 2021.
Same House, same call. This resolution is adopted. Next item.
Item 10, resolution approving and authorizing the execution of modification number 1 to the lease and use agreement with United Airlines and the city to increase the premises by approximately 92,000 square feet in an approximate total amount of $93 million over the remaining 7 years of the term expiring on June 30th, 2021.
Same House, same call. This resolution is adopted. Items 11 through 16 related to the master leases with the U.S. Navy.
These 6 resolutions approve various amendments between Treasure Island Development Authority and the United States Navy. Items 11 through 16 are Amendment number 10 to the Child Care Master Lease, Amendment number 26 to the Event Venues Master Lease, the 6th Amendment to the Firefighting Training Center Master Lease, Amendment number 39 to the Land and Structures Master Lease, Amendment number 18 to the Marina Master Lease, and Amendment number 30 to the South Waterfront Master Lease, and finally to extend the terms for 1 year, December 1st, 2014 through November 30th, 2015.
Same House, same call. These resolutions are adopted. Item 17.
Item 17, resolution authorizing the Office of Contract Administration to enter into 9 individual contracts for the technology marketplace purchases between the city and Endpoint Technologies, Worldwide Technology, Computerland of Silicon Valley, X-Tech, Technology Integration Group, the Central Computers, Stellar Services, Robert Half Technology, and Intervision Systems Technologies, with each individual contract initially not to exceed $12 million for the term ending September 30th, 2017, with 2 options to extend the contracts for up to 1 year each at the sole and absolute discretion of the city.
Same House, same call. This resolution is adopted. Item 18.
Item 18, resolution authorizing the execution, sale, and delivery of a multifamily housing revenue note in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $25 million for the purpose of providing financing for the construction of a 67-unit affordable rental housing development known as Bill Sorrow Community.
Same House, same call. This resolution is adopted. Item 19.
Item 19, resolution approving and authorizing the conveyance of real property located at 1009 Howard Street from the Office of Community Investment and Infrastructure to the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development, and approving and authorizing a 99-year ground lease totaling $99 with Mercy Housing, California 51.
Same House, same call. This resolution is adopted. Next item.
Item 20 is an ordinance designating the giant sequoia tree at 3066 Market Street as a landmark tree pursuant to Public Works Code Section 810, making the findings, supporting the designation, and requesting official acts in furtherance of the landmark tree designation.
Supervisor Wiener on the giant sequoia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, today before us is an ordinance that we don't see before us very often, specifically landmarking a tree. And we don't see it very often because it is not something to be done lightly. It's something that should be done very sparingly when a tree rises to the level that it deserves to be landmarked. This is for a landmarking of a giant sequoia tree located at 3066 Market Street. This landmarking has very, very strong and deep support in the neighborhood, in the Corbett Heights neighborhood, by the Neighborhood Association, as well as many, many neighbors in the area. I will say that I know, colleagues, you're maybe snickering a little bit about this. However, I will say I actually get stopped on the street about this tree and about the possibility that it might be removed. It's very distressing to a lot of people. This landmark designation will help ensure that this giant sequoia is preserved for future generations to enjoy. The tree is nearly 100 feet tall, and its trunk is approximately 12 feet in circumference. There are very few giant sequoias here in San Francisco, and it's not a common tree here, even though it is native to California. The tree has been evaluated by a certified arborist who found that the tree is a vibrant and healthy specimen. And so, colleagues, I ask for your support in ensuring that this magnificent tree is preserved in the Corbett Heights neighborhood.
Mr. President, I am requesting an amendment on this item, specifically on page 1, line 7, by adding as detailed in the ordinance, just to tie the official acts in furtherance of the landmark tree designation as detailed in the ordinance.
And, Mr. President, I'll move that amendment.
By the way, is it line 7 or line 17?
It's line 6 and 7.
Line 6 and 7. Okay. Supervisor Wiener is moving an amendment.
Thank you,
is there a
Supervisor.
second to that? Seconded by Supervisor Campos. Without objection, that amendment is made. And on the Supervisor Campos.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor of this item.
And with that, any other co-sponsors to this tall tree? Okay, with that, colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, the giant sequoia is designated a landmark tree. Passed on the first reading. And with that, colleagues, we do not have a 2:30 special commendation today. We will wait until 3 o'clock for our special order. Why don't we go to our committee reports? Madam Clerk, item 25.
The committee reports, Mr. President.
Yes.
Items 25 through 27 were considered by the Rules Committee at a regular meeting on Thursday, September 18th. The committee considered these items to be of an urgent nature and forwarded them to the board as committee reports. Item 25 is a motion reappointing Supervisor Malia Cohen to the Peninsula Corridor Joint Powers Board for a 2-year term ending June 30th, 2016.
Colleagues, could we have a motion to excuse Supervisor Cohen? Motion by Supervisor Farrell, seconded by Supervisor Tang. Without objection, she should be excused. And if we could take a vote on the motion, Madam Clerk.
On item 25. On item 25, Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Farrell.
Aye.
Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener. Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. There are 10 ayes.
The motion's approved. Item 26.
Item 26 was recommended as amended, adding the nominee to the title. It's a motion appointing Rita Semmel, term ending March 1st, 2016, to the In-Home Supportive Services Public Authority.
Roll call vote.
On item 26, Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos.
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. There are 11 ayes.
The motion's approved. Next item.
Item 27 is a motion appointing Michael Sullivan, term ending November 18th, 2016, to the Urban Forestry Council.
Same house, same call. This motion's approved. Item 28.
Item 28 was considered by the Rules Committee at a special meeting on Thursday, September 18th, and forwarded to the board as a committee report. Item 28 is a motion confirming the mayor's appointment of Miguel Bustos to the Commission on Community Investment and Infrastructure for a term ending November 3rd, 2016.
Same house, same call. This motion's approved. Item 29.
Item 29 was considered by the Land Use and Economic Development Committee at a regular meeting on Monday, September 22nd. This item was forwarded to the board as a committee report. It's an ordinance amending the planning code to authorize elementary and secondary schools and child care uses that exceed 25,000 square feet in the regional commercial district, to authorize a nighttime entertainment use in the Western Soma mixed-use office zoning district within 200 feet of any property within a residential enclave or residential enclave mixed district where a nighttime entertainment use legally operated within 5 years prior to an application to reestablish the use, and allow nighttime entertainment as a permitted use within the Western Soma mixed-use office zoning district.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you, President Chu, and colleagues ask for your support on this trailing cleanup legislation for our Western Soma plan, which we passed last March of 2013. It was a plan that had gone through a 7-year process and is a very detailed and complex plan allowing multiple types of uses, whether PDR, office, growing residential, and of course nightlife in our Western Soma neighborhood. There were 2 key pieces of the plan. Both institutions that we had been working with at the time of the plan, but had made some oversights around their inclusion. One being allowing elementary and secondary schools and childcare in the RCD zone of the Western Soma plan, which was our original intention, but not realizing that the growth of some of these sites would be prevented by a prohibition on any use larger than 25,000 square feet in the regional commercial district. This plan would allow a school to grow larger to that size. We currently only have one public school, K through 8, in the South of Market neighborhood, and it's incredibly important to this neighborhood to ensure that we have more schools growing in this area. And in this site in particular, we have a growing K through 8 Mandarin immersion school, Presidio Knowles, that we would like to see continue to expand on 10th Street. Second was just around an issue that colleagues I know were really engaged around, the 11th Street entertainment corridor. In our zoning changes to prohibit residential in order to prevent conflicts between the existing nightclub life, one that is particularly reflective of our LGBTQ community, we had an oversight with a parcel that had existing entertainment use and will be the future site of Tranny Shack, run by one of our well-known queens, Heklina. We're hoping that they will hit their 21st birthday on Folsom Street on the South of Market, and this cleanup will allow them to exist on a site where entertainment is already currently a use. And I do want to recognize Supervisor Wiener and Compost for their co-sponsorship of this cleanup language.
Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I want to thank Supervisor Kim and her office for their work on this important legislation regarding the Western Soma plan. We know that nightlife plays a huge role in our city in terms of the cultural life, in terms of the LGBT community, but also in terms of our economy. It's a $4.2 billion industry, employs 53,000 people, and contributes about $55 million to our city budget in terms of local tax revenues. And all too often, nightlife has been treated as a problem to be addressed in our city as opposed to the economic engine and cultural engine for our city. And so very frequently, unfortunately, zoning is a real challenge around ensuring that nightlife can thrive in our city and that nightlife can continue even in places where it's historically existed. And of course, zoning is important. There are areas that are appropriate for nightlife, areas that are not appropriate. But particularly when you have an area like Western Soma, that has historically been such a key part of our nightlife and nightlife in the LGBT community. And when you see venues that have historically been nightlife venues that are at risk of or are effectively banned from having nightlife, that's a great cause of concern. One of the concerns that I had with the Western Soma plan and why I voted against it was because I thought that it was not sufficiently supportive of the important role that nightlife plays in Western Soma, and was actually designed to try to reduce the number of permissible nightlife venues in the Western Soma neighborhood, and so I wasn't able to support the plan. But I am very appreciative that we're able to move forward with this fix to allow this location to resume its role as a nightlife venue. I am incredibly excited that Heklina, that T-Shack, formerly known as Tranny Shack, is going to be able to restart on a regular basis. That's a big benefit for the neighborhood. It's a big benefit for the community, and it's something we should all be celebrating. So I'm glad to be a co-sponsor along with Supervisors Kim and Campos, and I look forward to voting for this item today.
Supervisor Campos.
Thank you. I don't want to repeat all the points that have been made. The one thing that I agree with everything that's been said by Supervisor Kim and Supervisor Wiener. I mean, the one thing that I would add is that I think this provides an opportunity to have an anchor LGBT business in an area that already has a strong LGBT presence and a strong LGBT history. And it makes sense that it would be T-Shack with Heklina doing this. So I want to thank Supervisor Kim and her office, as well as Supervisor Wiener, for supporting this effort. And hopefully by the time this opens, maybe Heklina will be able to use her Facebook page as who she is. Thank you.
Without any further discussion, colleagues, can we take this item, same house, same call? Without objection, this ordinance is passed on the first reading. Madam Clerk, why don't we go to roll call?
The first member to introduce new business, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Avalos will submit Supervisor Campos.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, I have a number of items that I'm introducing today, beginning with what is landmark legislation to deal with the very important issue of gender pay inequity. Despite passage of the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which happened more than 50 years ago, which actually requires that men and women in the same workplace be given equal pay for equal work, the gender gap in pay persists. Census data from 2011 shows that the average woman still earns 70 cents on the dollar for every dollar that is earned by a man. The pay gap is even greater for African American women and Latinas. African American women earn 64 cents on the dollar and Latinas earn 56. Women comprise more than 50% of the labor force in the United States, and the consequences of this wage discrimination are not just impacts on women, but it actually impacts the entire family, it impacts the entire country. It means that women are having a hard time making ends meet and keeping up with inflation. In San Francisco, we are experiencing an affordability crisis, and we have seen that we have the fastest growing inequality in the country. We're not going to address that inequality unless we actually close this gender pay gap. Equal pay for equal work means that we can grow the middle class and build a broader economic base for our country. Equal pay for equal work is therefore not only a women's issue, it is an issue for every single American. The legislation that I am introducing today is aimed at making equal pay for equal work a reality at hundreds of San Francisco workplaces. The legislation is modeled after President Obama's recent federal directive that requires federal contractors to report compensation data, including data on the race and gender of employees, to the Federal Office of Contract Compliance. My legislation, and I want to thank Supervisor Kim for co-sponsoring this legislation and for her leadership in this issue. My legislation would do the following. It adds a new section to the Administrative Code's non-discrimination provisions that requires all city contractors with at least 20 employees to submit an annual equal pay report to the city's Human Rights Commission. This confidential report will include summary compensation information for employees identified by sex, by gender, and race. The legislation creates an initial phase-in period during which the director of the Human Rights Commission will be charged with convening a working group to design a data collection system that is best suited to identify if wage discrimination is taking place. The purpose of this working group is to ensure a thorough, accurate data collection system that also minimizes administrative burdens on city contractors. The Board of Supervisors, the Mayor's Office, the Commission on the Status of Women will work and are asked to work with the Human Rights Commission on this working group. After an initial phase-in period, if the Human Rights Commission believes that wage discrimination has occurred at a particular business, that commission can proactively investigate that business to determine whether workers receive equal pay for equal work. If the Human Rights Commission determines that the employer has violated equal pay laws, the commission can recommend that the city department that contracts with that company issue penalties against the company, including up to termination or suspension of any outstanding contract with the city. It is the first time that such power is given to any government agency in this country. The Human Rights Commission will report annually to the Board of Supervisors on the data it collects, any trends in pay discrimination, the number of investigations it commences based on the information received, and the number of contractors that were penalized for violating equal pay laws here in San Francisco. Discrimination based on gender and race is already prohibited in the city's administrative code as well as by federal law. Nevertheless, the Human Rights Commission only enforces those provisions when individuals actually file actions based on an allegation of discrimination. The problem is, though, that it is simply difficult for women to determine whether they are victims of wage discrimination because, as a 2011 survey from the Institute for Women's Policy Research found, that half of workers report that the discussion of wage and salary is either discouraged or prohibited or could lead to punishment. In other words, many companies ensure that the pay schedules and salary schedules are indeed a secret. There is a culture of secrecy around compensation that has ensured that this wage discrimination continues. This legislation is groundbreaking in that it provides the Human Rights Commission the data it needs to proactively investigate businesses without having to rely on individual worker complaints, and therefore ensuring equal pay at hundreds of businesses that contract with the City and County of San Francisco. This legislation is also unique in that it contains consequences for contractors that are violating equal pay laws. If, after an investigation, the Human Rights Commission believes that discrimination has occurred, the contractor can be required to pay monetary penalties and or risks losing the contract with the city. I believe that this legislation would put San Francisco on the map as one of the leaders in this country in ensuring that finally, after decades, more than 50 years, that we will finally secure equal pay for equal work in this country. I want to especially thank all of the amazing organizations that have worked with us on this piece of legislation, in particular the California National Organization for Women, whose president flew from Los Angeles yesterday to be at this press conference. And I especially want to acknowledge the tremendous work that my Chief of Staff, Hillary Ronan, put into making this legislation possible. The next piece of legislation that I'm introducing today is something that has been in the works for actually a number of years and is yet another piece of legislation that addresses the challenges that women face in San Francisco. As you know, Planned Parenthood opened in my district more than 3 years ago. And almost immediately upon the opening of Planned Parenthood, staff and patients at this clinic have been harassed and intimidated by protesters in front of its doors. The freestanding clinic sits before a relatively narrow sidewalk, if those of you have been to see it. Every week, as women enter the clinic to receive reproductive health services, they must pass by several protesters who scream things like, "Don't kill your baby," or "Abortions cause breast cancer." They are forced to walk by a barrage of posters lining the streets. The 8-foot tall posters contain pictures of bloody fetuses at different stages of gestation and phrases like "repent" or "burn." Oftentimes, religious music is playing on a radio, and the protesters actually have a video camera facing the doors, videotaping the women as they go in. In addition to the protesters, women often have to walk by counter-protesters, usually neighbors or pedestrians, in arguments with the protesters. The arguments are often loud and heated, and they happen directly in front of the clinic. Although these neighbors and pedestrians usually disagree with the protesters and believe strongly in the right of women to choose to obtain an abortion or use birth control, the arguments and yelling of counter-protesters can actually also cause patients immense stress as they wait for very sensitive and personal medical procedures. Anyone would feel harassed and intimidated having to pass by this scene. However, if you're a woman seeking sensitive health services or a woman who has made the difficult decision to obtain an abortion, this harassment could be detrimental to your health. Last year, to address this situation, to protect the health and safety of patients and pedestrians in the area, as well as for the purpose of upholding the rights of free speech and assembly of the protesters, I introduced and this board unanimously passed legislation creating a 25-foot buffer zone outside of reproductive health centers in San Francisco. After the implementation of this legislation, the situation that I described in front of Planned Parenthood improved dramatically. Patients were finally able to freely access services and avoid some of the stress associated with loud protests and conflicts between protesters and counter-protesters in front of the clinic. And the protesters, in the meantime, were able to express their rights under their speech under the First Amendment. Unfortunately, at the end of June of this year, the United States Supreme Court in McCullen v. Coakley invalidated a Massachusetts buffer zone law that was substantially similar to the San Francisco law. Because of that, my office and I have been working for the past few months with the City Attorney's Office to amend this buffer zone legislation so that it is compliant with McCullen, but also accomplishes the twin objectives of allowing women to safely and securely access reproductive health services without infringing upon the First Amendment rights of the protesters. I believe that the law that I am introducing today strikes that right balance. My legislation will continue to allow quiet, consensual conversations between anti-abortion counselors and women seeking services without subjecting Planned Parenthood's patients and staff to scary and intimidating harassment and conflict. Specifically, my legislation does the following. It prohibits anyone from following and harassing any person within 25 feet of a reproductive health care facility. It prohibits impeding access to the door of a reproductive health facility. It prohibits individuals from shouting or using amplified sound on any public street or sidewalk within 50 feet of the property line of a reproductive health facility. And if an individual violates any of these prohibitions, after a written warning, a police officer can require that individual to disperse and remain 25 feet away from the health facility for 8 hours or until the close of business of that facility. I want to thank the City Attorney's Office, especially Erin Bernstein, for the incredible work that she has done on this issue. I believe that we are striking the right balance of complying with McCullen, but in typical San Francisco fashion, making sure that we protect these women as much as we possibly can. I also want to thank Planned Parenthood, who has been working with us on this issue for the last few years, and who have been patiently awaiting a resolution. I especially want to thank the staff of Planned Parenthood, who on a daily basis risk their lives to provide access to health care for these women. I also want to thank the neighbors in my district who surround this clinic, who have had to put up for many years with a great deal of harassment. It is time that we in San Francisco once again send a message that we believe in a woman's right to choose for themselves what to do with their bodies. The next item is an item that both Supervisor Wiener and I have talked about, and it's an item that includes a resolution that we will be voting on later on today, and that is the issue of PrEP. In the last 5 years, 2,066 San Franciscans have been newly diagnosed with HIV. The number of newly acquired HIV infections among gay and bisexual men, women, and communities of color, as well as transgender individuals, continues to rise despite an overall decrease in the rate of new infections in San Francisco. On July 20th, 2012, the FDA approved the first drug preventing the sexual transmission of HIV. However, fewer than 3,000 people in this country were actually prescribed Truvada for PrEP nationwide, in both 2012 and 2013, and fewer than 1,000 of them were actually prescribed here in San Francisco. San Francisco has played a leadership role in the response to HIV for more than 30 years. This is where the AIDS movement started. However, we have not yet rolled out PrEP to the full extent possible. It is time for San Francisco to resume its leadership role. I believe that expanded access to PrEP is a strategy that supports San Francisco's overarching public health goals, and I believe that we need to act now. This is why today I am introducing a budget supplemental for $801,000 to increase funding for PrEP in San Francisco. I want to thank Supervisor Kim, Supervisor Marr, and Supervisor Avalos for co-sponsoring this important supplemental. I believe that expanded access to PrEP is something that we need to do now. The first component is to develop and implement a drug assistance program specifically for PrEP. The San Francisco's Department of Public Health has been in contact with the Washington State Department of Health to discuss their program, which we are trying to model. And we know that our Department of Public Health would collaborate with Washington State to make sure that our program is as successful as possible. The cost of PrEP to individuals vary widely. Without insurance, PrEP can cost as much as $1,800 per month. Under Covered California, PrEP costs between $1,500 and $700 per month, depending on the coverage levels. And in conjunction with insurance coverage and assistance from Gilead, the manufacturer of the drug, we can reduce this cost. And the goal here is to minimize the costs to every person who can benefit from PrEP. The statistics and the studies show that if used properly, PrEP can eliminate HIV infections by as much as 99%. And so doing PrEP has the potential to essentially eradicate HIV infections in San Francisco. The second component of my PrEP plan is to provide navigators in the community that will serve as a resource for individuals seeking to access PrEP. These positions will support people in understanding and applying for public and private benefits, accessing medical care and medications, and maintaining benefits already received. Increase PrEP education for patients and providers, PrEP navigators to assist patients in obtaining insurance benefits, and copay assistance for patients are critical. By having these navigators, we're actually minimizing the amount of money that the city has to pay. I believe that in the end, this is not only the right thing to do because it will save lives, but ultimately it will save a great deal of money. We know that for every HIV infection that we prevent in San Francisco, the city will save at least $355,000 in treating that individual who is infected. That's hundreds of millions of dollars that the city and county of San Francisco can save because of this effort. I lastly want to thank Supervisor Wiener, who has spoken personally about this issue, for his courage, and I want to thank everyone who has made a point of discussing this issue, because part of the challenge that we face is that we're not talking enough about this very important matter. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Campos. Supervisor Wiener, did you want to add to Supervisor Campos's comments?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. I want to thank Supervisor Campos for really pushing on this issue. It's incredibly important on many different levels. We have a medication, a tool, a prevention tool that if we actually increase awareness around it, increase access, and reduce the stigma related to it, we can absolutely collapse HIV infection rates in San Francisco, around the country, and around the world. I think it's sometimes easy to forget that we still have an HIV epidemic. 50,000 people a year in the U.S. are infected, 2 million each year around the world, and of course almost 400 a year here in San Francisco, where we have always been at the leading edge of prevention efforts. And this city has been absolutely brilliant in our approach to prevention. But even with 30 years, more than 30 years of brilliant prevention work, we still continue to see almost 400 people a year seroconvert. We are seeing people who have managed to stay negative for 20, 30 years become positive. We're seeing too many young people, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, who are becoming positive. And despite all of our efforts, we have not been able to bridge that gap and complete the elimination, the eradication of this disease, of these new infections. And PrEP is what is going to allow us to bridge that gap and actually envision an end of HIV, an end of new infections. And it is really perplexing to me why, in this day and age of so much knowledge about public health, that there continues to be resistance, that there continues to be stigma around something that we know is going to save lives. The arguments we hear against PrEP are the same as we hear against birth control. and we need to really counter that. And so what's been happening here at the Board of Supervisors with the hearing last week, with this supplemental, with all the discussion that we've been having, and I hope I've been able to play a role in that discussion, I think we are raising the awareness, we're increasing the momentum towards access and making sure that people are able to afford this critical prevention measure and reducing the stigma. And so I look forward to continuing in that discussion. And there's a lot we need to do to make this drug more available. So thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. I have a few things to introduce today. First, there was a recent research poll that some of you may have read about that came out indicating that 91% of voters believe that it's important to protect small businesses and artists from being displaced by development and growth. Prior to this poll, our office had been working with the South Beach Merchants Association on stabilization measures for small businesses on 2nd Street in the South of Market area. This is in partnership with another set of interim controls that we have also introduced. Today, I'm introducing the second half, interim controls for 2nd Street between King and Folsom Streets to support small neighborhood businesses and to promote an active retail frontage along 2nd Street, an emerging retail corridor in the South of Market, to really couple with the work that we're doing around the 2nd Street improvement plan. These interim controls are important to stabilize businesses that are facing displacement pressures from the incredible office growth use, which are currently allowed on the ground floor in this neighborhood. These controls will help us to continue the work of developing permanent zoning through the Central SOMA Plan that recognizes and promotes the unique mixed-use character of the neighborhood, which includes small design firms, art spaces, and, of course, retail uses. The intent of this legislation is to support the mixed residential and commercial character of 2nd Street and South Park to promote the economic diversity of the city and support neighborhood-based planning and engagement of the South Beach Merchant Association in crafting permanent controls with the planning department. The South of Market continues to absorb tremendous growth due to the neighborhood's proximity to downtown and existing and proposed transit. This growth is important for the city, yet we need to both preserve and encourage ground floor neighborhood serving retail that makes this area attractive to residents, new office tenants, and their workers. Second, I'm submitting a hearing request calling for presentations from the Department of Building Inspection, SFMTA, Department of Public Health, and Department of Public Works on their process for issuing construction night permits and road closures. While many of our residents in Rincon Hill and Trans Bay are happy to see the residential growth finally happening in their neighborhood and promised commitments of infrastructure finally being put into place, and seeing our economy swing back into force, the economic success is also bringing a lot of construction in a very concentrated section of our city where we have existing residents. We counted no less than 5 to 7 major construction sites in this very small neighborhood. Our office has been fielding increased complaints, emails, and concerns from residents requesting better coordination between these multiple large construction sites, along with clear guidelines on how DPW issues nighttime construction permits, and also clear guidelines for the construction companies on how to manage noise. I'm fortunate to represent a district with residents that are fairly tolerant of living in an active, multi-use neighborhoods with ballparks, nightclubs, bars, and entrances to our freeways. However, we must be cognizant that people do live here. The primary concern that comes up is construction activity permitted between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. that disrupts the sleep and affects the health and well-being of our residents. As someone that has lived next to a construction site before, there's nothing more disruptive than being awoken morning after morning for months. Our office has been convening residents, construction companies, and department staff to increase communication amongst all of our parties about these nighttime noise activities. We have already yielded some initial positive results from these meetings. I would like to get an update from the department staff on additional ways the city can continue to address and mitigate residents' concern and improve our quality of life and peace at night. And finally, I am submitting an in memoriam for a special constituent in our district. I'd like to adjourn today's meeting in the memory of Joyce Williams, whose memorial took place last Wednesday. Joyce was born in New York in 1942 and passed away August 31st, 2014. Joyce lived at Cannon Kip House in the south of Market, where community members could often find the motorcycle maniacs souping up bikes in front of the sidewalk. Joyce identified as agendered and dedicated a significant amount of time advocating for the rights of queer and non-conforming gendered residents, as well as citywide tenant issues. Joyce finished life as a high-ranking martial artist, as well as an active member of Access of Love Medical Cannabis Community Center. Joyce was a professional locksmith who loved tinkering with anything mechanical. Joyce spent countless hours baking medical cannabis brownies to give away to low-income patients and disabled seniors living in the south of Market. Joyce believed that if you served a higher power, not through a religion, but through community service and good deeds. Joyce also had boundless love for everyone and a very sweet smile. Joyce was last seen by many at Aunt Charlie's Lounge in the Tenderloin at a fundraiser benefiting Camp Sunburst, a summer camp for children with HIV. This was a special nonprofit that Joyce donated time and money to. Joyce's passing was sudden and unexpected, and many in our community are mourning the loss of their friend. Joyce is survived by a brother and their beloved cat, Pinto Bean, and the neighbors at Cannon Kip House and the community at Access of Love. Special thanks to John Martinelli, a friend and a neighbor, for adopting Pinto Bean. And the rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Marr.
Thank you. I have a couple of items. Let me start quickly by saying I just learned that one of my key mentors and heroes, a 99-year-old woman named Grace Lee Boggs, has just issued a statement. She's really slowing down in Detroit, where she lives. Grace Lee Boggs, and she's requested to share a statement that she recorded recently with one of her supporters, Scott Kurashige, and I just wanted to read a statement really quickly. I wanted to also say that the statement says they want people to respect her privacy, as she cannot entertain interviews, phone calls, or visitors right now, and to thank everyone for the love and the struggle they've shared with her. Grace Lee Boggs was born in 1915, and this is not an in memoriam, but a hope for peace for her. She's an activist, writer, and speaker whose 7 decades of political involvement encompasses the major U.S. social movements of the past 100 years. She was the daughter of Chinese immigrants. Ms. Boggs received her BA from Barnard College and her PhD in philosophy from Bryn Mawr College. She developed a 20-year political relationship with the black Marxist C.L.R. James, followed by extensive civil rights and black power movement activism in Detroit in partnership with her husband, James Lee Boggs, who passed away in '93. I met Grace over 20 years ago along with my friend Scott Kurashige, and we helped to organize a Serve the People conference at UCLA. That was a long time ago. But we brought Grace out, and also the incredible Yuri Kochiyama, who passed away only weeks ago. But what was important was that they shared their experiences, not preaching to us, but their lives, with a new generation of community organizers and youth leaders. And I'll never forget the amazing warmth of Grace Lee Boggs for younger people like myself. Grace was such an inspiration, as she continues to be, with new generations of grassroots activists in Detroit, where she lives and has lived for many decades, to many activists in Oakland and San Francisco and in the Asian American movements as well. Grace dictated this to my friend Scott this morning, and Grace Lee Boggs says, "I am coming to the end of a long journey, a journey that began over 70 years ago at the beginning of World War II. This journey has basically been to show that there is an alternative to past models of fundamental change in this country. It has taken us a long time to accomplish this, but we have been able to do so both as a result of our historical vision and because of the very practical efforts of comrades who have risen to the challenge of creating a revolution unlike any revolution that has been in the past. Because of my increasing physical limitations in the last few years, I have not been able to play the role that I might have played. But that is not as important now as recognizing what has been achieved, a revolution that is based on the people exercising their creativity in the midst of devastation, is one of the great historical contributions of humankind. We will be finding ways and means to celebrate this, one of which will be the Detroit Reimagining Work and Culture Conference in October. We want people to understand how much this concept of new work and new culture is based upon not only enormous activity, but also on vision and imagination. So that's her statement. There's a great film about Grace's life called An American Revolutionary, The Evolution of Grace Lee Boggs. And also there are a number of Bill Moyers interviews with her that I encourage people to watch as she brings philosophy and thinking to using our hands and our hearts to make a better world for everyone. My heart is with Grace and her family and friends in Detroit, and I wish her peace and thank her for all she has given to me and so many others that dream a better world. And also, like the millions globally that just participated and are participating in the People's Climate Marches, the UN Summit today, the Flood Wall Street yesterday, like them, I wanted to thank Grace for her 99 years and decades of work building a better and more sustainable world. The items that I have today, one is a resolution I'm introducing along with Supervisors David Campos, Malia Cohen, and John Avalos. Even though San Francisco is only a few weeks into the school year, the education of our students, San Francisco Unified School District students, could be interrupted by a potential teacher and staff strike. The contract negotiations between the United Educators of San Francisco and the San Francisco Unified School District have unfortunately slowed down, and talk of a strike is rising. I wanted to thank teachers and paras, but also Myung Lee and Jamila Brooks, the liaison to the school district, to the board, for their input in helping to write this resolution. There are real issues to resolve. The average San Francisco teacher makes only $62,000 a year, while starting teachers make around $50,000. But paraprofessionals, also known as learning support staff, and who often work with the most vulnerable student populations, students of color, low-income students, they make only an average of $25,000 a year. These salaries have not been increased since 2008, before the Great Recession. Since 2008, of course, San Francisco has become even less affordable than even before to live in. I know of a number of teachers and staff that are facing evictions and displacement from the city. And the reality is that teachers really are increasingly unable to afford to live in our city, that they're giving so much to, especially our children. As a father of a high schooler, I know that teachers, for example, being forced to leave, being pushed out of the city in the middle of the school year would be incredibly disruptive to all the students. This disruption will continue to occur if we, as a city, don't take stronger efforts to keep teachers and paras in San Francisco. But the San Francisco Unified School District, I should also acknowledge, has received limited resources from the state, and it's well known that our state ranks dead last in per pupil funding in the nation. The resolution that I'm introducing today, again with Supervisors Campos, Cohen, and Avalos, urges the San Francisco Unified School District and the Teachers Union to quickly seek common ground for the successful resolution of negotiations so that we can allow educators to remain in San Francisco and to remain San Francisco residents, while also aiding the San Francisco Unified School District's long-term fiscal health. I'm not advocating for a specific outcome today, but I don't want to strike. And as a parent, I don't want our schools and our children's education disrupted. I'd also like to thank, again, the input from many to put the resolution together. And lastly, on a historic and positive note, today is National Voter Registration Day. It's the single largest national event focused on registering voters in the upcoming November 4th election. I think it's 40 days from now, but you only have about 30 days to register to vote. There are many grassroots and community-based organizations around the country holding different events, but also really focusing on young people to expand democracy so that we have a strong voice from the new generations. Local community groups are holding voter registration events throughout the city to educate potential new voters about their right to vote and historically why that's so important for strengthening our communities. In particular, events in Chinatown and on school campuses encourage those who are traditionally underrepresented, and I would say historically disenfranchised consciously, that we encourage young voters, immigrant voters, low-income voters to register to vote and to participate. And while Asian Americans make up a little over a third of the city's residents, only 23% of Asian Americans are registered to vote in our city. And currently, Asian Americans eligible to vote in San Francisco, of them, only 54% are registered, which is comparatively lower than the national average of 71%. So to consciously counter that, grassroots groups like the Chinese Progressive Association, the Asian Law Caucus, Chinese for Affirmative Action, and many others are conducting targeted voter registration drives throughout the city, at City College of San Francisco, at the Chinatown campus and Ocean campus, also at high schools like Galileo, which I know a couple of my colleagues proudly graduated from, Lowell High School and many other high schools as well. By voting in local and national elections, disenfranchised communities can have a stronger voice in helping our families succeed, so children can receive a quality education, workers can receive justice, and are able to provide for their families, and all of us can afford to stay in San Francisco. Eligible voters can register to vote online today. It's really easy. Online voter registration is available also in multiple languages, including Chinese and Spanish and Vietnamese and many languages that are spoken in San Francisco. You have only until October 20th to register to vote in California to make it for the November 4th election, and it's a critical one. Voters who have moved or changed their name must re-register, so it's really simple to do it online now. So I look forward to working with my colleagues and others to expand democracy, especially by encouraging younger people to vote and people in high schools and younger people in our communities to participate. The rest I'll submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Marr. Supervisor Wiener.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, today I'm introducing a hearing request about the state of our light rail vehicle system and specifically MUNI's plans over the next few years to improve service on our light rail lines until the cavalry comes in the form of new light rail vehicles from Siemens. Last week, we did something very exciting in passing the resolution approving the MTA's contract with Siemens for ultimately the next generation of light rail vehicles, which will nearly double the number of light rail vehicles we have. These vehicles will be more reliable, need less service, have better passenger capacity, and so forth. I'm very optimistic for the long run of our light rail system once the Siemens vehicles are in place, and I look forward to that happening. But we know that we have a gap. Right now, our light rail vehicles are the primary source of lack of reliability in the system. We don't have enough to begin with, and they break down frequently. We have so few that when they do break down, or if one is in even a fender bender with no one being hurt, something minor, once we lose a light rail vehicle, we don't even have a replacement for it. And riders see the consequences every day when there are big gaps in service, when there are vehicles that you can't even squeeze onto because there are just not enough vehicles, and when vehicles break down in the system and clog up and shut down the subway in its entirety. And so while it is exciting and important that we are going to have this next generation of light rail vehicles, we need to know what MUNI is doing now to make sure that this system becomes more reliable and that we do the absolute most with what we have for the next number of years. The first wave of LRVs from Siemens, the new ones, will arrive in 2016 for the Central Subway. But it will be several more years after that until we start seeing these new LRVs in the system as a whole, and then there will be a gradual transition over time as we decommission the defective Bredas and put the Siemens into exclusive use. And so this hearing will explore with the MTA what the current situation is, and I will say that light rail service has deteriorated in the last number of months. MUNI was making some good progress, had more vehicles in service, was even running 3-car trains during rush hour. That appears to have completely deteriorated as some accidents have occurred and some breakdowns and other mechanical problems. And so we need to know what the current situation is, what the plan is to get us out of this current situation, and how Muni sees the next 3, 4, 5 years going in terms of not just saying to riders, don't worry, at some point in the future it's going to be all fixed, but how is it going to function in the next number of years as we continue to grow as a city and as more and more people are relying on this transit system. So I look forward to that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wiener. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Today, colleagues, I would like to adjourn a meeting in memory of State Senator John Ferran, who passed on September 11th at his home in District 7. Senator Ferran helped shape California's transportation policy over 22-year career in the state legislation. He also played a major role in enacting California's Clean Air Act. After his retirement from the state Senate in 1986, the San Francisco section of the Interstate 280, as you may know, the 280 freeway, was named in his honor. The senator authored bills that established the Metropolitan Transportation Commission in the Bay Area. Some of you are members of that, which became the country's first regional transportation authority. And legislation that allowed the Golden Gate Bridge District to broaden its authority to include bus and ferry transit systems. And there's several of us that are also on that particular board. His work continues to make an impact on Bay Area transportation and will for long into the future. Senator Ferran had a lifelong interest in politics and law. He graduated near the top of his class at USF School of Law and served as a Deputy Attorney General before running for public office. He retired in 2004 and traveled extensively and enjoyed spending time with family and friends. And Senator Ferran is survived by his wife of 56 years, Connie, his 2 sons and 2 daughters, and 4 grandchildren. The rest I submit.
Thank you, Supervisor Yee. President Chu.
Thank you, colleagues. I have a couple of items today. First, I want to start with a difficult in memoriam. I want to recognize the passing of Pui Fong Yim Lee, a loving mother and grandmother who previously taught music and language in China and had been a resident of Chinatown for 20 years. As many of you know, Mrs. Yim passed away after being struck by a speeding car near the Stockton Tunnel this Saturday morning. She was 78 years old. Born and raised in China, Mrs. Yim moved to our city 2 decades ago, and she has 5 children in the Bay Area. Her husband passed away a few years ago, but she chose to live alone in Chinatown to be with her friends and her community. On the day of the collision, Mrs. Yim had dropped her children off at the Chinatown Library and continued on her way to her senior center for a game of mahjong. She was an active member of her family association and its choir. Her oldest son said that his mother strictly followed traffic rules and taught her grandchildren to look both ways before crossing the street and to pay attention to street lights. When the light would turn yellow, Mrs. Yim would pull back and patiently wait until it was safe to cross. I know there are many throughout our city who are incredibly saddened by this loss. This is a tragedy that is another wake-up call that San Francisco needs to do more to protect pedestrians. Ironically, on Saturday morning, I was heading to the Prop A event, where I know many of you were there to advocate for more funding for transportation safety, when I was called to join the scene. And just earlier today, I have to mention, at 11 a.m., there was another collision at the same Stockton and Sacramento intersection, resulting in another pedestrian injury while we were sitting here during our County Transportation Authority meeting. And many of you may recall longtime Chinatown activist Isabel Huey, who was killed in January this past year after being struck by a speeding car on Jackson Street a few blocks away. She was 84 years old. I think we're all incredibly frustrated and saddened by these back-to-back tragedies. In the past few years, Stockton Street alone has witnessed hundreds of collisions. We know that older adults are among the most vulnerable to be killed or injured, and with a large aging population in Chinatown, pedestrian and street safety must be a top priority for our city. In this year's District 3 participatory budgeting process, our residents voted to allocate $20,000 to make pedestrian safety improvements at the highest need intersections. I'm requesting that the MTA use this funding, along with other available resources, to examine pedestrian safety improvements and traffic calming measures for Stockton and Sacramento, including creating an intersection scramble, extending light timing, installing better signage, and widening the sidewalks. We all need to do whatever we can to protect our residents so that we don't lose any more of our members in this tragic way. And on behalf of our city, I want to offer our condolences to Mrs. Yim's family, her 8 grandchildren, and her 5 sons. She will be missed dearly by all of her friends and neighbors in Chinatown. Now, related to the area of public safety on our streets, I'm also requesting that the MTA review its policy on the ability of bus operators to call 911 in cases of emergency. Yesterday morning, as I was heading to a muni bus stop, I saw an elderly woman lying on the ground. She had been trying to board the muni bus, ended up falling and hitting her head. As I approached the scene while she was not moving, the bus driver was attempting to call an MTA dispatch to report the emergency, but he was put on hold. When I asked if anyone had called 911 for an ambulance, this bus driver told me he had not because of an MTA policy that did not allow him to do so. I ended up having to call 911. Thankfully, the woman regained consciousness and an ambulance was finally on its way, but our muni bus drivers should have the ability to call 911, and if that's not the case, I'm going to be requesting that the MTA make this change to this common sense policy. Today I'm introducing another piece of legislation, a major reform of our city's contracting laws to expand city contracting opportunities for local, diverse, small businesses. This is a reform that comes after hearings that I held earlier this year, and I want to thank the many representatives of small businesses and diverse current and future contractors, including the Coalition for Economic Equity, who have championed our contracting laws for years. I'm introducing this legislative package, along with Mayor Lee, to reform Chapter 14B of the Administrative Code. And I also want to take a moment and thank our city administrator, her staff, and the many department representatives for their work on this topic for many months. 3 decades ago, our San Francisco Board of Supervisors passed Chapter 14B after acknowledging a history of passive and sometimes active discrimination in our city's contracting policy to fulfill our city's commitment to economic development in all of our diverse neighborhoods and communities. Over the years, this is a law that has helped to foster a vibrant network of small, diverse businesses throughout San Francisco. But in recent years, there have been many in our community who believe that there has to be reform of our current rules to make sure that we're maximizing the hundreds of millions of dollars that we could be investing in our local and diverse businesses. We know that our small, local, diverse businesses are often at a disadvantage when they compete for public contracts against larger firms or businesses located outside of our city, and we need to do more to level the playing field for small businesses. The reform package that Mayor Lee and I are introducing includes at least 15 policy changes. I'd like to describe a few of those key reforms. The most important element of what we are proposing is that we establish a citywide goal for local and small business contracting of no less than 40%. At this time, there's no citywide data that we know of that precisely tells us exactly where we are, although experiences with larger contracting departments indicate that this is an achievable goal. Our legislation also includes reform to require that departments first make an effort to, when it comes to smaller contracts, to first obtain bids from local businesses. For construction contracts under $400,000, for professional service contracts under $100,000, we are asking departments to make good faith efforts to obtain 3 bids from local businesses before opening up the contracting process to non-local business enterprises. Our legislation also expands 14B requirements to projects that require a development agreement to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. The legislation increases thresholds for certifications of local businesses in certain industries, which will allow small businesses in our city to continue to participate in our LBE program as they succeed. Our reform package also includes anti-retaliation provisions, as well as creates mentor-protege programs to foster partnerships between established contractors and local businesses. We know that there's more that we can do for our local and small businesses. We need to make sure that we're leveling the playing field. And again, I want to thank our mayor, our city administrator, as well as many advocates who've worked with us for many months to move this forward. The rest of my items I will submit.
Thank you, Mr. President. Seeing no other members' names on the roster, that concludes the roll call for the introduction of new business.
Colleagues, why don't we now go to our 3 p.m. special order? Madam Clerk, could you call items 21 through 24?
The Board of Supervisors will convene a committee of the whole for a public hearing of persons interested in the proposed resolution of formation for special tax district number 2014-1, establishing the Trans-Bay Transit Community Facilities District, resolutions to determining necessity to incur bonded indebtedness for the CFD, the resolution calling for a special election to submit the issues of the special tax, and incurring bonded indebtedness, and the establishment of the appropriations limit to the qualified electors of the Community Facilities District. This public hearing was continued open from September 2nd and September 9th, 2014.
Thank you, colleagues. This is a hearing that we started a few weeks ago. It has been held and is continued, and what I'd like to do, unless there are any initial comments from the district supervisor, is to turn it over to Mr. Ken Rich for an update on where we stand today.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Ken Rich with OEWD. We have just a short report for you today. 2 weeks ago at this hearing, we reported to you on an alternate payment arrangement that we had discussed with some of the developers involved that would allow some of the payments to be made for the special taxes over a longer period of time, resulting in more payments made over that period of time and the same net present value to the city. We also told you that we had made it clear that we would need agreement from 6 developers in terms of supporting the Melrose district, not initiating legislation against the city and some other things. The report I have for you is that we were not able to receive that agreement. We did not receive those waivers from all 6 developers. And so, as I think we promised to you 2 weeks ago, our recommendation today is to move forward with the original set of resolutions without the alternative payment arrangement, with the original payment arrangement, and that we would ask you to move those forward today. I was going to ask my colleague Nadia to say a few words in explanation of some things, and then we'll be finished with our report.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Nadia Sisay, Director of the Office of Public Finance. I do want to just clarify that the $1.4 billion that's referenced in the legislation in front of you, and as was presented at the board on September 2nd, 2014, is the maximum aggregate principal amount that could be issued through the life of the district. It is separate and different from in terms of what's been reported on, and most importantly, the agreement that we had discussed at the last meeting resulted in an equivalent amount as was presented to the board. So the agreement we were looking at kept the city whole and the project whole in terms of project funds available to the project. I do also want to acknowledge the financing team that's been working with us on this transaction: Jones Hall, Chris Lynch, Susan Goodwin Consulting, Tim Conwell from Concord Group, Anna Van Degner and Eileen Gallagher as well from Stifel. I would also like to thank the City Attorney's Office for their help in this. I'd be happy to answer any specifics you might have on the numbers.
Thanks, Nadia. So again, our recommendation is that you pass the original resolutions that were in your file 2 weeks ago, and we're open to any questions you have for staff.
We have a number of colleagues on the roster. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank staff for your work in the last number of weeks to try to come up with a resolution here. As I've stated at previous hearings, I've always taken a very dim view to the claims asserted by the developers here that they somehow interpreted the documents as locking in the bottom of the market valuation of these properties, even though the upzoning and the subsequent growth we've seen have just exploded the values of these properties. So I've never really really understood how that argument can be made in any kind of meritorious way. It doesn't make any sense, and I've always been of the view that we need to just approve this, and the developers need to pay into the Mello-Roos what they committed to pay into the Mello-Roos to make sure that that Trans Bay can move forward, that the downtown extension can move forward. I was pleased when the resolution was proposed 2 weeks ago, because contrary to an editorial that ran in the paper, that resolution would have gotten the TJPA every single penny to which it was entitled. The net present value was exactly the same, and so there was no detriment whatsoever to the city or to TJPA. It was simply a restructuring of how exactly it got paid by the developers. But unfortunately, I guess maybe the developers realized that from our perspective we were getting everything, and so they decided not to do it. And that's, I guess that's their choice. But we now hear that if we approve this, they're going to file a lawsuit. And I'm of the view that anyone can threaten to file a lawsuit, and it happens all the time. And we shouldn't let that back us down in terms of doing what they want us to do, which is to drain hundreds of millions of dollars from the Mello-Roos, which will be pretty devastating to our ability to deliver the downtown extension. So I think we should be approving this Mello-Roos as is and moving forward. And I hope they don't sue. I think it's a very weak lawsuit, but regardless, I don't think we should be bullied into giving up a huge amount of critical transit money because a group of developers don't want to fulfill their obligation under this massive upzoning that the city did for these properties. But regarding the lawsuit, I have a question for Mr. Rich. I know in the planning code and the creation of the Trans Bay Transit District, there is a requirement that the developers, quote unquote, participate in the Mello-Roos. And so the question is trying to tank the Mello-Roos either by voting against it and defeating it, or filing a lawsuit to try to blow it up. Is that participating? And if it is not, and that's a violation of the terms of this district, what are the consequences?
Thanks, Supervisor. Let me articulate the city's position as follows. The developer's agreement to establish a CFD to help finance Trans Bay facilities was an essential part of the city's agreement to grant the developers substantially more floor area ratio, which gives them a huge increase in the value of their projects. If any of the developers oppose establishing the Mello-Roos district by failing to vote for its formation, or by taking any administrative or legal action to impede its formation, that would violate the project's conditions of approval and or their DDAs with OCII or agreements with the TJPA as applicable. In such a case, the city would have remedies under the planning code and or the DDAs or TJPA agreements against those developers, which could include, for instance, not limited to, depending on the circumstances, withholding occupancy permits for the buildings in question, or withholding future discretionary permits during the construction process.
Okay, so if a developer were to either vote against the district or sue to overturn the district, or otherwise impede the ability of the district to form, the city could withhold a certificate of occupancy, could withhold other discretionary permits, presumably building permits.
Yes, among a group of permits, yes.
Okay, and so the city does have that ability, and is the city, I imagine, actively considering actually taking those steps, because I think it's important for these developers to understand that I think they, in a way, I don't want to broad brush, I think that there are a number of developers here, and there's probably some distinctions to be drawn, but I think at least some of the developers, one in particular, seem to be of the view that they have sort of a free shot, that they don't want to have to pay all the money that they're legally required to pay. So they can just file a lawsuit, just hire a lawyer, file a lawsuit, and there's no downside for them. They simply get a free run of potentially having some judge overturn the district, although I think that's unlikely. And if the judge rules against them, if they lose their lawsuit, then they go and they pay into the Belarus. But they've now delayed everything, and they have this huge bludgeon that they're trying to wield to say, if you don't give us what we want, if you don't reduce by hundreds of millions of dollars what we have to pay towards the downtown extension, then we're going to mess up your Belarus by filing a lawsuit, trying to get it overturned, and at a minimum delaying it, because there are always delays with litigation. And so it's really a terrible tactic, and I'm really disappointed that they're moving in this direction. I think it's very important, and I'm glad to hear your statement, that we are very clear that there will be consequences for developers who pursue this route to try to undermine this district.
Supervisor Farrell.
Thanks, President Chu. I think Supervisor Wiener said most of what I wanted to say. But I just want to reiterate thanks to Ken Rich and Nadia Sase for all of their hard work on this. They've done a tremendous amount of work over the last few weeks trying to get us to a place of agreement. I think it's also important, very much important to note that the proposal that we were considering previously, again, made our city 100% whole. And that's why, as a board, we were considering. I think a number of us would have been supportive of that. But very disappointed that we are where we are today. But we will move forward and look forward to continuing work with everyone to make this a reality.
Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. Also, ditto, I'm also disappointed that we weren't able to get to a resolution today that would have made our city whole and also avoided potential litigation around our CFD formation and potentially risk some of the private financing that we have coming in for the terminal really just in a few months. And so, some of my concerns is just that, the impact of litigation are more immediate for us than for the developers who may not open for 2, 3 to 5 years from now. But I am glad to see that we'll be moving forward with what we had originally agreed upon that keeps all the dollars that we had committed both to the neighborhood and to the city, and want to recognize the mayor's office and the mayor in his role in being really strong and always standing a very firm line for really the entire year before this even came to the board. I just have a couple of technical amendments to read into the record on 2 of the resolutions. First is just on file number 140814, the resolution of formation for the City and County of San Francisco Community Facilities District. The first is on page 3.
Actually, Supervisor Kim, I haven't yet closed the hearing, so what I'd like to do is to, if there's any public comment on this, hear if there's any discussion, public comment, close the hearing, and then move to the consideration of the items.
That's fine. So I'll wait to make a motion on these technical amendments until after the public comment then. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Yee.
Thank you, Chair Chu, President Chu. I guess I'm going to ditto. I'm pretty disappointed. I mean, it seems like this is what the developer asked us to do. He came to us to say, stop the process, and see if we could come up with a compromise that they wanted. And I thought most of the things that they were working towards was settled. So I'm, like everybody else here, probably very disappointed that it didn't work, and yet it's already postponed us for 2 weeks. My question, and I'm glad Supervisor Wiener's line of questioning is clarified that there's some consequences to this. I'm just curious. I don't know how much you could divulge on this, but what happened that it fell apart? Can you clarify that at all?
I guess, rather than you naming specific names, I think that the issue is that the compromise, or the new payment plan, as I prefer to call it, required from the beginning that all 6 developers were agreeable. Otherwise, if we don't get promises not to sue from all 6, that's pointless, because if one sues us, it's the same as if they all sued us. And so we weren't able to get that. There were 2 or 3 that were on board from the beginning, and there were a couple that we couldn't get in the end. We thought we had assurances, we did have assurances in the beginning, but minds were changed or something changed. So that's pretty much what happened. And by late last week, it became clear that we were not going to get the agreement from all of them. Again, and I'm going to avoid naming names, but there were several that were on board immediately and were never a problem, and there were a few others that we couldn't get. So that's what happened.
Thank you. And I also want to thank the mayor's office and yourself for the work that you put into this and trying to reach a compromise.
Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you. And I just want to, that last comment by Mr. Rich, I think is really important. I want to be very clear in my comments. I'm a big believer in not broad brushing, and I know that there were, I think, 6 different developers here. I do not want to in any way imply that we're trying to demonize all these developers. I know there were some that were willing to agree to this, which I think was the right thing to do legally, and also the right thing to do in terms of being good civic actors. And I'm appreciative of the developers that were willing to enter into this very good resolution. But unfortunately, not all of them were. And actually, it brings up a larger point that I think sometimes when things like this happen, we're working very hard to try to address the future needs of the city around housing, around all sorts of creating new neighborhoods, all sorts of different kinds of very positive development for the city. Development is not easy in this town. We know that it takes a long time. There's a lot of opinions. We see a lot of fights, and it's a very difficult process. And we try to really make the case to residents in this city that good, smart, well-planned, thoughtful development is a positive thing for the city, and that is sometimes a very hard argument to make for people. But a lot of our residents, they get that, and even though they may not always, like it, people are willing to accept that. When you have a situation like this, where the public sees that you have, and again, not all of these developers, but at least some who are backing out of a clear commitment that we're going to do an upzoning in exchange for you helping to fund these transit infrastructure needs. When the public sees developers reneging from that commitment, that gives a black eye to all development. It makes it harder for other developers who are trying to do the right thing by doing really good development and participating in the needs of the community. And so I think it's unfortunate that this has happened, but again, it's the reality of where we are, and we'll just deal with it. Thanks.
Thank you, colleagues. Any further discussion? Let me ask if there are any members of the public that wish to speak in this public hearing.
Hit the Transbay Road, Jack, and all that tax hits the road, Jack, and all that tax. Hit the road, Jack, and Transbay tax, hit the road, Jack, and all that Transbay tax. That's what you say. Good luck with this item today.
Any other members of the public wish to speak on this topic, please?
Tom Gilberti. What did we have here? I think everybody knew that it was a transport center deal, and it was very nice and generous. And now there's somebody wants to put a lawsuit together to stop it, kind of like almost a hostage situation. What they're after is the city and the people of San Francisco losing a little bit of money, or a lot of bit of money, and the developer plans to keep a little bit more money. So I'm thinking, why don't we put a little bit of our lawsuit together and put a lien on all their properties and all of the officers, the chairman of the board of directors, and put a lien on the personal property that they own, and just leave it like that for a while and see, because they're going to make money from our losing money. It's kind of interesting idea. Thank you.
Any other members of the public wish to speak on this topic? Okay, seeing that, at this time, this hearing has been heard and is now filed. Colleagues, items 22 to 24 in the hands of the board. Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. So I will read the technical amendments right now and make a motion to adopt them. Again, that they're merely technical in nature. The one is on the first item, the resolution to form the Community Facilities District on page 3. Lines 7 through 9, really just to reflect that we had a continuance of this public hearing. And whereas the Board of Supervisors opened the public hearing on September 2nd, 2014, and continued set public hearing to September 9th, and whereas the Board of Supervisors continued the public hearing on September 9th, 2014, and further continued the public hearing to September 23rd, 2014. And then finally on page 6, further resolved, the Board of Supervisors hereby acknowledges receipt and accepts the terms of a statement from each of the 3 public agencies in accordance to Government Code 53111, in which each states that all or a portion of its land is intended to be transferred to private ownership, that its land will be subject to the special tax on the same basis as private property within the CFD, and that it affirmatively waives any defense based on the fact of public ownership to any action to foreclose on the property in the event of non-payment of the special tax, and be it. And this is to acknowledge some recent statements that we've gotten some of our public agencies, including Caltrans. And then I have one more amendment on the item resolution calling for the special election, City County of San Francisco Community Facilities District. And this is just an amendment on page 2, lines 21. It merely states the date of the election. Further resolved that this Board of Supervisors hereby calls a special election to consider the measures described above, which election shall be held on December 29th, 2014. And I just want to reiterate that while we were very wary of the number of continuances in impacting the date of election and our ability to finally form the Community Facilities District, that these continuances, at least up until thus far today, won't impact any of our scheduling on bond issuance. And so that will be the date of the election.
Thank you. Supervisor Kim has made a number of technical amendments. Could I have a second to that amendment? Second by Supervisor Campos. Without objection, those amendments are made. And colleagues, on items 22, 23, and 24, can we take those items together? And can we take a roll call vote on the items?
Mr. President, also today we received the amended and restated Community Facilities District report for item 22. Did the board want to receive that without objection?
Colleagues, if we take a motion to receive that report without objection, motion made without objection, that should be the case. Okay. Roll call vote on the resolutions.
Supervisor Avalos? Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed? Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos?
Aye.
Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu?
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell? Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim?
Aye.
Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr?
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang?
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee?
Aye.
Yee, aye. There are 11 ayes.
Resolutions are adopted. Colleagues, when we now go to general public comment. Madam Clerk.
At this time, the public may comment generally for up to 2 minutes on items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the board, including those items on the adoption without reference to committee calendar. Please note that public comment is not allowed on those items which have already been subject to public comment at a board committee. Pursuant to Board Rule 4.22, please direct your remarks to the board as a whole, not to individual supervisors nor to the audience. Speakers using translation assistance will be allowed twice the amount of time to testify, and if you would like a document to be displayed on the overhead projector, please clearly state such to SFG TV and remove the document when the screen should return to live coverage of the meeting.
Let's hear from our first speaker.
Supervisors, all over San Francisco today, there's a lot of congestion. And y'all keep on deliberating, and we've seen today in a different way how some people do favor the developers, but then when certain type of amendments are made and certain type of shenanigans take place, then they do not like the developers. But my point is very simple. We have too much congestion in our city, which impedes not only the traffic and how people move from point A to point B, but now we have reached a saturation stage where our ambulances cannot move from point A to point B on time. And you supervisors have been slow in addressing this. But some of y'all have been very fast to put down our fire chief. And I think the people of San Francisco should stand up. I know some supervisors don't like her because they say that she hasn't done sufficient for the minorities or whatever. But I think so. If you look at the fire chief's performance, and you look at the performance of those supervisors who criticize her, I know that many of the supervisors are not representing the community. So I'm saying this: let us be leery, not to throw stones, and not to fault our fire chief. Our fire chief has done a lot of good. And I know, I'm fully aware, that because of some instigation, some of the fired men and women are trying to force our chief of our fire chief out of a position, but I hope that will not happen. Thank you very much.
Next speaker.
My name is Yolanda Lewis, and I just want to raise a very critical issue as far as the developments in San Francisco and consideration for changes the way that permits are issued. We want to see some work being done in order to look at decentralization of our water resources as well as our wastewater. We're looking at options for technologies that we can put in place that we can help to reduce the amount of water that we are taking away from Hetch Hetchy and some of our other valuable resources that are being depleted as a result of this drought. We would like for you to take a look at, when you look at the overall development plans in the future, there are projections in some of the water conservation plans that state that the active conservation is only going to be 2%, which is not enough when we're dealing with a drought, worst drought in known history. We need to begin to look at other solutions which will be considered as far as looking at the development projects and make sure that there are infrastructures in place which are already available on the market, and it's not cost prohibitive, it's very affordable, but no one is looking at those things in order to force these developers to ensure that we can maintain a reliable, safe, and quality drinking water supply for our constituents. So if we look at the technologies, we can prevent some of the contaminants that have been happening. We see what happened in Ohio where the people weren't able to use their water. We have California, San Juan Bautista, 2 months they were not able to use their water. We had Virginia where the governor went on record saying he wished he could have a hot shower. And then in Louisiana, the brain-eating amoeba that's infected the groundwater supply. We do have Hetch Hetchy, but they're talking about mixing it with 5% of groundwater, which is not being currently looked at as far as protecting our citizens. So we just ask that you please take a look at that in moving forward in the planning phases so that we can be proactive and stop being firefighters, and we can have groundwater that is available for our next generation. Thank you.
Next speaker.
Well, here I am again, this time with a personal story regarding equal pay for women and for equal work. And Supervisor Campos has promised me that he will talk with you about that. As a woman, almost all of my jobs had to begin as a secretary, except during World War II, when the men went to war. I became an editor for the Associated Press in Kansas City for 6 years. I moved to California after the war and was told, again, we don't hire women in news. So I took a secretarial job at KMBR NBC Radio. 2 months later, I was moved to head publicity, then became promotion manager, advertising manager, public affairs manager, editorial writer. But I discovered after 19 years, my annual raise was what I would have received as a secretary. Never a raise for my added responsibility in management. Then some women working in NBC News in Washington filed a complaint in the public court. They won full pay, and I received a huge raise. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Morrison. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, President Chu and supervisors. Someone's knocking at the new St. Anthony's door. Somebody's ringing the new St. Anthony's bell. Do me a favor, open the door and let 'em in. Ooh, yeah. Sister Susie, Brother John, Martin Luther, Gillendong, woo, Uncle Ernie, Auntie Jen, open the door, let 'em in. The new St. Anthony's, open now soon. Do you believe in life after government? I can swear something inside me said, I really don't think the city's strong enough. I've been reading in the city news, and I heard about all those city blues. Well, I don't like that, and I hope the Giants do better at bat. And I hope you paid your city dues, and maybe this city's even too good for you. Do you believe in life after city government? I can swear something inside me said, I really don't think the city's strong enough. Well, I know that you'll make it city through this, 'cause I know that you are city strong. And I'm gonna sing my city song. Why don't you sing along? Do you believe in city life after government? And I hope this city does some more, and you're gonna have some good things in store. Do you believe in city life after gov?
Next speaker.
My name is Eugene Gordon Jr. Redress. The expression complying with innocence reveals a revolution, ending colonial rule to where use of A itself, by weighing constitutional law and contradictions in aggression, fraud, imperialism. These select words characterize an educational for capital currency, financial cost, orientation as exchange for production and labor. By ending that motivation, accenting our US of A imperialist nation, when its entrenched home base uses a financial cost, constant request for donation, charity, public vote, and opposing too much government while celebrating US of A pride. Asked to vote on ballot measures equates such pride with entrapment fraud. This is fascist class rank divide with corporate conceit. When applied as democracy's territorial manners, party to a peopled racism, chauvinism, sexism. Witness the inflections and votes for it. The telephone rings, caller asking for financial donation. My response, listen to you. If we had public ownership of the means of production, there would be no need for this telephone call. Conversation ends.
Good afternoon, supervisors. If you're like me, then you are probably outraged and sickened by the accounts of domestic abuse and the violent nature of our society that we hear about in the news seemingly on a daily basis. This news becomes even more distressing and appalling when it involves our youth. I say enough is enough. San Francisco must lay down the framework for a no-tolerance policy in teen violence and fighting on campuses. We can't afford to sit around deliberating on the wherewithal while morticians are rolling the gurney with yet another deceased teen down the aisle. The parents or guardians of any teen engaging in fighting should be called in to meet with officials on the schools that the students attend. The students should be offered two alternatives to corrective disciplinary actions. One, that the students be placed on a remote independent study curriculum for a semester. The consequences or of attempting to return to school prior to meeting conditions would result in trespass and citations. 2, any student guilty of repeated truancy should be turned over to juvenile hall with the recommendation that he or she be admitted to the Youth Authority in Pennsylvania. The youth represent our future. Sadly, in some cases, they represent the erosion in some elements of our society, and we must take corrective actions to protect them from harm that they might inflict upon themselves or others. Without a guiding hand or a beacon of light to shine down on them, they will be lost at sea.
Good afternoon. My name is Henny Kelly. I've been a teacher for 40 years in the city, and I really, at this point, would like to thank my supervisor, Eric Marr, for bringing the resolution that the district and the workers find a common ground. I have a son who is a paraprofessional. I'm always sad to hear somebody talk about how much money he makes. I have a husband who is a teacher, a daughter who is a teacher, and as I said, I was a teacher for 40 years. I learned something about working in education. I learned why the salary is so low. I learned it while walking the picket line in a 6-week strike. And I was told by a gentleman standing next to me that the reason that teachers and paraprofessionals had such a low pay was because this was considered a woman's job. Think about that. And then look to the resolution that we also have that came up today about comparable pay for comparable work, and about really studying how people are paid in San Francisco. These things go together. I basically believe that our paraprofessionals are mostly women and women of color. Our teachers are mostly women. I want them to get a fair salary, and I support the resolution for us to look at all women in comparable job with men in this city and make sure they all get a fair.
Next speaker.
Mr. President, victims of the cabal. My name is Christopher Dahl, and I live at 6th and Howard. 14 meters and 10 blocks from sea level, I rise to continue my comments on government in the 21st century. In previous comment, I described the purpose of government as maximizing the capacity of its constituents to adapt to circumstance. How does one adapt to circumstance? You need accurate perception of the circumstance. You need the skills to design adaptive solutions and the resources to enact those solutions. As a matter of governance, accurate perception is served by official standards and measures. Design skills are encouraged through education and resources distributed through a smooth venue of exchange, a market. Today's new tools of social intermediation serve each of those themes. Perception of new circumstances, of new events and products is constant and immediate. The construction of new tools and techniques is just as constant and just as immediate, and exchange is efficient and prompt. How so? Perception, that's Twitter and Google and Reddit. YouTube covers the tools and techniques, and eBay does the exchange. And perception is where you can start implementing governance in the 21st century. You can know where every speeding automobile is right now. You can know where every gram of methamphetamine is right now. And you can know where every dribbling faucet is right now. You must at least end your ignorance, because in the face of YouTube, in the face of MIT Online, ignorance is not only obsolete, ignorance is stupid. Thank you, Mr. President.
Next speaker.
Hello, Supervisors. My name is Richard McCree. And I've lived in the city since 1969. I'm very proud of what the city has done in the past more than in the recent. I fear that San Francisco is going to make a really big mistake here pretty soon, because the public is entitled to know why Candlestick Park is going to be destroyed, and many people do not even know it. It's a shocking waste. This is the way our society wastes fossil fuel energy, by destroying useful structures like Candlestick rather than creating green jobs to make them better and make them live longer. There's no reason why Candlestick can't be a soccer stadium for 100 years. And it's not a big deal for a developer to rearrange the pieces on his map to be able to relocate things in a way that's graceful, that's well done, that's practical. And there's no excuse for a developer to be allowed to create a phony alternative that absolutely lies about the potential of the scheme, and that's what we've been sold. And here I have to mention that I represent 80 people that are behind me at this point. We've got a petition online because we know that it's not correct. What's going on is based on improper state and federal law. And if you have any question, go to my MoveOn.org petition. It says Candlestick Moratorium. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for San Francisco, and just dismiss your old idea of development. Development, as we've seen it, has based on an impractical and stupid model of endless consumption. We have got to stop that. If San Francisco is progressive, it will stand up and say, look, developers, well, I know you've made all these plans, but look at the basis of them. The law is improper. And I want you to know that this is just a shame.
Next speaker.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Bradley William Krause. I am a service-disabled veteran, social entrepreneur, and football player. I am here today to request a motion to stop the destruction and redevelopment of Candlestick Park and to seek new alternatives to sustain and develop Candlestick Park Stadium up to and including to seek an active and participatory involvement to obtain a Major League Soccer franchise. I further request the Board of Supervisors to seek a new historical assessment, one which does recognize the now deceased architect John Savage Bowles as the master of architecture that he is, and that Candlestick Park is, for many great and greatly overlooked facts, a national landmark, and can assess the positive, sustainable alternatives to meld the developer's proposed plans with our current infrastructure. Furthermore, I have been talking and working with other communities here involved in the Bay Area. We have the oldest football association still within our city limits, the San Francisco Soccer Football League. This fall season, we are recognizing the 114th year of our existence. That is both longer and more serving than FIFA, the U.S. Soccer Association, and any other soccer involvement throughout America. It is why today we seek a positive resolution moving forward that can see Candlestick Park both sustained for the future, for our community, for our families, and for everybody else involved. Thank you very much.
Hi. You ever consider that this meeting is measured by his birth? That Jesus was the only one in all of history that said when he was going to come up from the grave. Last week we learned that Paul proved Jesus was the Messiah by the prophecies. Behold, my servant shall deal prudently. He shall be exalted and extolled and be very high. As many were astonished at thee, his visage was so marred, more than any man, and his form more than the sons of men. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. The Bible says, straightway Paul preached Christ in the synagogues that he is the Son of God. But all that heard him were amazed and said, Is not this he that destroyed them which called on this name in Jerusalem and came hither for that intent, that he might bring them bound unto the chief priests. But Saul increased the more in strength and confounded the Jews which dwelt at Damascus, proving that this is very Christ. And Paul, as his manner was, went in unto them, and 3 Sabbath days reasoned with them out of the Scriptures, opening and alleging that Christ must needs have suffered and risen again from the dead, and that this Jesus whom I preach unto you is Christ. In front of King Agrippa, he said, having therefore obtained help of God, I continue unto this day, witnessing both to small and great, saying none other things than those which the prophets and Moses did say should come, that Christ should suffer, and that he should be first to rise from the dead. The Old Testament spanned 1,100 years from Moses to Malachi. Malachi said, remember ye Moses, my servant. So the prophets backed up each other.
Next speaker.
Tom Gilberti. I've made reference to 1967. I've made reference to Martin Luther King as the point of an arrow, center of a bullseye, about what moral society can do. Travis Smiley just wrote a book about 1967 and Martin Luther King. He will be interviewed on Forum tomorrow morning. Should be very interesting. Next, I caught another marker for our society. I caught the Roosevelts. And 80 years ago, we had nothing to fear but fear itself. And while you guys were on vacation, we had a Dick Cheney interview. And the interview was, we have to double down on our fear. There are more people we need to be afraid of. There are more people that want to hurt us, even in our own town. Another marker which way our society has gone. And another little marker, 2 weeks ago there was a vote in the UN. I think it was 182 to 2. The two people were the United States and Israel. Being an honest broker, again, I don't think so. Next item, let's go to housing with a little bit of time. This is what I started last time. There was 2,000 units that wanted to go from rent control to tenants in common, and I have a way of making it happen when it goes offline. You start with a person, AB, age 78, years owned the property 44, equals a ranking of 122. You go to the next person, 60 years of age, owns the property 30. The reason I like this ranking is because the people that have owned the property and have been part of San Francisco the longest get rewarded and can go into tenants in common. They have the option. And we'll continue another time, I hope. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak in general public comment? General public comment is now closed. Madam Clerk, could you read our adoption calendar?
Items 32 through 34 are being considered without committee reference. These items are considered routine. A single member may object, remove it, and send it to committee or consider it separately.
Colleagues, would anyone like to sever any of these items? Okay. Madam Clerk, can we take a roll call vote?
On items 32 through 34, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Avalos. Avalos, aye. Supervisor Breed. Breed, aye. Supervisor Campos. Campos, aye. Supervisor Chu.
Aye.
Chu, aye. Supervisor Cohen. Cohen, aye. Supervisor Farrell. Farrell, aye. Supervisor Kim. Kim, aye. Supervisor Marr.
Aye.
Marr, aye. Supervisor Tang.
Aye.
Tang, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Supervisor Yee.
Aye.
Yee, aye. There are 11 ayes.
These resolutions are adopted and motions approved. And Madam Clerk, could you read the in memoriams?
Yes, today's meeting will be adjourned in memory of the following individuals. On behalf of President Chu, for Kui Fong Lim Yim. On behalf of Supervisor Kim, for the late Robert Joyce Williams. On behalf of Supervisor Yee, for Mrs. Rosetta San Giacomo, Mr. and former State Senator John Francis Ferran.
I want to take a moment to thank SFGov TV with Jonathan Gomwalk and Derek Fernandez for bringing this meeting to your homes today. And with that, Madam Clerk, is there any more business in front of the board?
That concludes our business for today, Mr. President.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.